There comes a point in life when you realize that not every misunderstanding needs to be corrected. Not every accusation deserves a defense. And not every person is entitled to a detailed explanation of your choices. This realization does not come from arrogance. It does not mean you have stopped caring about others. It means you have finally learned the difference between being clear and begging to be understood. For years, you may have believed that if you explained yourself well enough, people would see your intentions. You thought that if you found the perfect words, gave enough details, and answered every question, they would finally recognize the truth. But sometimes, the problem is not that your explanation is unclear. Sometimes, the other person has already chosen the version of you they want to believe. Mentally strong people understand this. They do not refuse to explain themselves because they are cold, still, or emotionally unavailable. They simply know when communication has reached its natural limit. They speak when speaking creates understanding. They clarify when clarity protects an important relationship. They apologize when they have done something wrong. But they do not remain trapped inside an endless courtroom, presenting evidence to people who have already reached a verdict. Their power does not come from silence alone. It comes from clarity. They know who they are, what they value, why they made a decision, and where their responsibility ends. Most people over-explain because they are not certain that their own reasons are enough. Someone asks why they declined an invitation, and instead of saying, "I am not available," they describe their schedule, their responsibilities, their exhaustion, and everything that happened during the previous week. Someone questions why they ended a relationship, and they begin proving that they tried hard enough, waited long enough, forgave enough, and suffered enough. Someone criticizes their career choice, and suddenly they are presenting their future like evidence before a jury. What appears to be communication is often a hidden request for permission. Beneath all those words is a quieter sentence. Please tell me that my decision is acceptable. This is the emotional trap. When you believe that your choices require approval, every disagreement begins to feel like danger. A question sounds like an accusation. A different opinion feels like rejection. Someone's disappointment becomes proof that you have done something wrong. As a result, you keep talking, hoping that enough explanation will remove the discomfort. Yet the more desperately you explain, the more authority you give away. You send the message that another person has the power to decide whether your boundary is reasonable, whether your pain is legitimate, and whether your life direction deserves to continue. There is an important difference between responsibility and emotional dependence. Responsibility asks, have I acted honestly? Have I communicated clearly? Have I considered how my decision affects other people? Emotional dependence asks, have I convinced everyone to approve of what I have done? The first question belongs to you. The second belongs to the world. You can control your intentions, your conduct, and your willingness to listen. You cannot control the conclusions another person reaches. You may speak with complete honesty and still be called dishonest. You may act with restraint and still be called weak. You may protect your peace and still be called selfish. You may leave an unhealthy situation and still be blamed for ending it. The Stoics understood this thousands of years ago. They divided life into two categories. The first contained what belongs to us, our judgments, choices, values, and actions. The second contained what does not belong to us, the opinions, reactions, and decisions of other people. Most emotional suffering begins when we confuse these categories. We try to control what was never ours to control, while neglecting the character that remains entirely within our hands. We cannot force another person to interpret us fairly. We cannot enter their mind and rearrange their assumptions. We cannot stop them from repeating an incomplete story, but we can decide whether their misunderstanding will govern our next action. This does not mean you should become indifferent to truth. Mature people correct harmful misinformation when necessary. They communicate with those who are genuinely affected by their choices. They admit mistakes, instead of hiding behind pride. Mental strength is not stubbornness, and clarity is not an excuse to ignore accountability. If you have caused harm, you owe honesty. If you have broken trust, you owe an explanation. If your decision directly affects someone who depends on you, communication becomes part of your responsibility. The difference is that mentally strong people explain themselves to create understanding, not to escape the discomfort of disapproval. You can usually recognize the difference by paying attention to your emotional state. When you speak from clarity, your words are simple. Your tone is steady. You do not need to control the response. You explain what happened. Listen to the other person and remain willing to correct yourself. When you speak from fear, your words become longer. You repeat the same point in different forms. You reveal private details that were never owed. You become more anxious each time the other person fails to agree. Instead of having a conversation, you begin performing for acceptance. Ask yourself why being misunderstood feels so threatening. For many people, the answer begins in childhood. They learned that belonging depended on being agreeable. Love felt safest when they caused no inconvenience. They were praised for being easy, obedient, quiet, or helpful. When adults became disappointed, the child assumed that disappointment meant rejection. So the child learned to explain, apologize, and adjust before conflict could become abandonment. Years later, the body still reacts as though every disagreement might end the relationship. The person is no longer a child, but the old survival strategy remains. This is why setting a simple boundary can create such intense guilt. You say no, then immediately feel the need to soften it. You worry that the other person will think you are selfish. You imagine them discussing your decision with someone else. You begin constructing a long explanation, not because your answer was unclear, but because you are trying to control their emotional reaction. In that moment, you are not simply communicating a boundary. You are asking the other person not to punish you for having one. Mentally strong people learn to tolerate this discomfort. They understand that someone else's disappointment is not automatically evidence of wrongdoing. A person can dislike your boundary without your boundary being unfair. They can disagree with your choice without your choice being immoral. They can feel hurt even when you have spoken respectfully. Emotional maturity means allowing other people to have feelings without immediately treating those feelings as instructions. You can care about someone's disappointment without surrendering the decision you know is necessary. One of the most powerful sentences you can learn is, "I understand that you see it differently." This sentence does not attack. It does not apologize for existing. It makes space for disagreement without turning disagreement into war. Another useful sentence is, "I have explained my decision, and I do not have anything more to add." At first, these words may feel harsh, especially if you are accustomed to managing everyone's emotions, but clarity often feels cruel to people who have benefited from your confusion. Some individuals will repeatedly demand explanations because your uncertainty gives them influence. As long as they can make you defend every choice, they remain at the center of your attention. They question your memory, challenge your intentions, shift the subject, and return to accusations you have already answered. You believe the conversation continues because understanding has not yet been reached. In reality, understanding may never have been the goal. The goal may be exhaustion. The longer you defend yourself, the more likely you are to surrender, simply to make the pressure stop. Mentally strong people recognize when a conversation has stopped being a search for truth. They notice when questions become traps, when clarification becomes interrogation, and when disagreement becomes punishment. At that point, they do not search for more persuasive language. They end the cycle. They may say, "You are free to disagree," or "This conversation is no longer productive." Then they step away, not because they have no answer, but because they understand that an answer cannot help someone who is committed to misunderstanding it. This requires enormous self-control. The ego wants the final word. It wants to correct every distortion and defeat every accusation. It imagines that one perfect sentence will suddenly reveal the truth. But wisdom knows that some people do not change their minds through information. Their opinion may protect their pride, justify their behavior, or preserve a story in which they are always right. Accepting your explanation would require them to examine themselves, and many people would rather misunderstand you than confront their own conduct. You must learn to recognize the difference between a person who seeks clarity and a person who seeks ammunition. Both may ask questions, but their intentions feel different. The curious person listens to your answer. They consider your perspective. They may still disagree, but they do not punish you for speaking honestly. The hostile person interrupts, changes the subject, and uses every detail against you. They do not ask because they want to understand. They ask because they want more material for the argument. Giving such a person additional explanations is like adding wood to a fire and wondering why it keeps growing. The mentally strong person becomes selective. He does not share every private reason simply because someone demands access to it. He understands that privacy is not dishonesty. A boundary does not become invalid because it is brief. No can be a complete answer when the request does not require more. "That does not work for me" can be sufficient. "I have made my decision" can be enough. The strength is not in using these sentences aggressively. It is in saying them calmly, without adding 10 paragraphs designed to prevent someone from disliking you. Calmness is essential because mental strength is not measured by how dramatically you resist. Shouting a boundary is not always stronger than stating it quietly. Sometimes, anger is only another form of fear. You become loud because you are still trying to control the other person's response. Genuine clarity does not need theatrical force. It knows that a boundary remains a boundary whether the other person applauds, protests, or walks away. Consider a mountain standing beneath changing weather. Some days, sunlight touches every surface. On other days, the mountain disappears behind clouds. Storms arrive. Snow covers the ground. Wind moves across the stone. Yet the mountain does not chase the weather. It does not attempt to explain itself to every passing cloud. It remains where it is. This is what an inner standard creates. Praise may arrive. Criticism may follow. But neither becomes the foundation of your identity without an inner standard. Your sense of self changes according to the room. When people approve of you, you feel confident. When they question you, confidence disappears. One compliment makes you feel valuable, while one insult makes you doubt years of progress. This is an exhausting way to live because public opinion never becomes stable. The same qualities that one person admires may irritate another. Confidence may be called arrogance. Patience may be called weakness. Ambition may be called selfishness. Caution may be called fear. There is no version of you that every person will interpret in the same way. If you attempt to satisfy all of them, you will become fragmented. You will speak differently around each group. You will hide opinions, change preferences, and abandon boundaries. Eventually, you may become so skilled at adapting that you no longer know what you actually believe. The need to be understood by everyone slowly disconnects you from your own mind. This is why mentally strong people spend time examining their values. Before pressure arrives, they decide what kind of person they want to be. They ask themselves which principles matter more than comfort. They determine what they are willing to sacrifice and what they refuse to betray. When conflict appears, they do not invent an identity in the moment. They return to the one they have already built. Clarity begins with self-knowledge. You cannot explain a decision confidently when you do not understand your own reasons. Many people over-explain because they are trying to convince themselves as much as they are trying to convince someone else. They speak in circles because the decision has not yet become firm inside them. This is why quiet reflection matters. Before announcing a major choice, sit with it. Examine your motives. Ask whether the decision comes from fear, pride, wisdom, or resentment. Consider the consequences. Listen to trustworthy advice. Then decide. Once you have done this work honestly, your words become shorter, not because you have less to say, but because your thinking has become organized. Confusion produces excessive language. Clarity removes what is unnecessary. A person who has examined his values does not need to improvise a defense every time someone questions him. He can say, "I considered this carefully, and this is the decision I believe is right." Others may disagree, but their disagreement does not reopen every question inside him. There is still a danger here. Self-trust must not become stubbornness. A mentally strong person can listen without surrendering his authority. He does not reject criticism automatically. He asks whether the speaker knows the situation, whether their intentions are sincere, and whether their life demonstrates wisdom. He separates useful feedback from emotional projection. If the criticism reveals a genuine mistake, he changes course. Strength is not the refusal to change. Strength is the ability to change for a good reason, rather than because pressure became uncomfortable. Think carefully about the people whose opinions control you. Do they understand your circumstances? Do they share the values you want to live by? Have they shown honesty, consistency, and concern? Would you trade lives with them? Many people seek approval from individuals whose choices they do not respect. They become emotionally disturbed by criticism from people they would never ask for guidance. This is one of the strangest contradictions in human behavior. We allow careless opinions to carry enormous weight simply because they were expressed with confidence. Not every opinion deserves equal authority. A trusted mentor who understands your goals may offer criticism worth examining. A friend who consistently wants the best for you may notice something you cannot see. But a stranger making a quick judgment from limited information does not possess the same insight. Someone who benefits from your lack of boundaries is not an objective judge of your decision to create them. Someone who dislikes your growth may call your independence selfish because your dependence once served them. This is where emotional independence begins. It does not mean you stop loving people. It means love no longer requires self-abandonment. You can respect someone without obeying every expectation. You can hear their concern without making it your command. You can remain compassionate while choosing a different direction. Emotional independence allows relationships to become more honest because you are no longer pretending agreement to prevent conflict. Many relationships survive only because one person is afraid to disappoint the other. They say yes while feeling resentment. They remain silent while their boundaries are crossed. They explain, apologize, and accommodate until their personality almost disappears. From the outside, the relationship may look peaceful. Inside, pressure continues to build. Eventually, the person either collapses or explodes. Neither outcome is true harmony. Peace created through self-erasure is only delayed conflict. Mentally strong people prefer honest discomfort to comfortable dishonesty. They understand that a difficult conversation today may prevent years of resentment. They speak clearly before anger has time to accumulate. They do not expect others to read their minds. They say what they need, what they cannot accept, and what will happen if the pattern continues. Then they observe the response. A healthy person may feel disappointed, but they remain capable of respect. They ask questions without attacking. They negotiate where compromise is possible. An unhealthy person treats every boundary as betrayal. They accuse, threaten, or withdraw affection. This response reveals something important. The boundary did not destroy the relationship. It revealed the conditions upon which the relationship had always depended. You may lose people when you stop over-explaining. This is one of the hardest parts of becoming mentally strong. Some individuals were comfortable with the version of you who could be pressured, persuaded, or made guilty. When you become clear, the relationship changes. They may say you have become distant. They may accuse you of thinking you are better than them. They may remind you of how agreeable you used to be. What they call change may simply be the end of your self-betrayal. Do not assume every loss is a failure. Sometimes, distance is the natural result of becoming more honest. Two people can care about each other and still become incompatible. Understanding does not guarantee agreement. And agreement does not guarantee a healthy relationship. Some differences cannot be solved through additional words because the issue is not communication. The issue is conflicting values. One person may value stability while another values freedom. One may want closeness while another requires more independence. One may forgive quickly while another needs time. Neither person must become a villain. Maturity allows you to acknowledge difference without turning it into an endless trial. You can say, I understand what you need, but I cannot become that person. You can leave without writing a 1,000-word argument designed to make the other person declare you innocent. Acceptance is often more powerful than explanation. When you stop trying to change a person's interpretation, you make room for reality. Perhaps they will never understand. Perhaps they need years before they see the situation differently. Perhaps they will remain convinced that you were wrong. This may hurt, but pain is not the same as danger. You can survive being misunderstood. The fear of misunderstanding often comes from believing that reputation determines identity, but reputation is only the version of you that exists in other people's minds. Each person holds a different version, shaped by their experiences, expectations, fears, and limited access to your life. You cannot manage all these versions. Attempting to do so will consume every hour you possess. Character is different. Character exists in what you repeatedly choose. It is built when no audience is present. Reputation may change through gossip, jealousy, or one incomplete story. Character changes through action. A mentally strong person invests more energy in character because it remains within his influence. He would rather become honest than convince everyone that he is honest. He would rather act courageously than spend years describing his courage. He would rather live according to principle than perform goodness for approval. Your life eventually becomes your clearest explanation. Consistent action answers questions. Words cannot. People may doubt your discipline, but years of steady work speak for themselves. They may question your integrity, but repeated honesty leaves evidence. They may misunderstand why you walked away, but the peace and growth that follow reveal what endless arguments could not. Time does not prove that every decision was perfect, but it exposes patterns. A performance can survive for a day. Character reveals itself across years. This is why mentally strong people do not announce every plan. They understand that talking about a goal can create the emotional reward of progress before real progress has begun. They tell everyone they are changing, building, studying, training, or preparing. The attention feels satisfying, but the work remains unfinished. Strong people often protect the early stages of transformation. They do not hide from shame. They protect the goal from noise. There is power in allowing your actions to introduce you. Instead of telling everyone that you are becoming disciplined, wake up and do the work. Instead of promising that you will be more reliable, arrive when you said you would. Instead of explaining why you deserve respect, behave in a way that makes self-respect unavoidable. Quiet execution creates a confidence that public approval cannot provide. This confidence is not the belief that you will always succeed. It is the knowledge that you can trust yourself to respond with integrity, even when success is uncertain. You trust yourself because you have collected evidence. You kept promises when nobody was watching. You continued after motivation disappeared. You admitted mistakes without collapsing into shame. Each small act became a vote for the person you intended to become. When self-trust grows, the need to explain decreases. You no longer need another person to confirm that your boundary is reasonable because you have examined it carefully. You do not need everyone to believe in your goal because you are willing to work without applause. You do not panic when someone criticizes you because criticism no longer has immediate access to your identity. This does not make you emotionless. Words can still hurt. Rejection can still disappoint you. False accusations can still produce anger. Mental strength is not the absence of feeling. It is the ability to feel without surrendering control of your behavior. The strong person notices anger, but does not allow anger to write the message. He feels the urge to defend himself, but waits until his mind becomes clear. He knows that the first emotional reaction is rarely the wisest version of him. Imagine a lake during a storm. The surface becomes restless, and every reflection is distorted. The sky appears broken. The mountains lose their shape. Yet nothing beyond the surface has changed. When emotion becomes intense, the mind behaves in the same way. A disagreement feels like betrayal. One criticism erases years of praise. A delayed response becomes rejection. The solution is not to make an immediate decision based on the distorted reflection. The solution is to wait until the water settles. This pause is one of the greatest forms of power. The world encourages immediate reaction. Message arrive, and we feel pressure to answer at once. Someone criticizes us publicly, and we believe silence will be interpreted as guilt. We rush to protect the narrative before anyone else can speak. But speed is not the same as wisdom. Clarity often requires time. Many regrets begin with an instant reaction. Un message sans une injure. A relationship ended during one heated conversation. A reputation damaged by words that could not be taken back. Very few people look back and wish they had reacted more impulsively. Many wish they had waited 1 hour, one night, or one day. Mentally strong people use time as a filter. They ask whether the issue will matter tomorrow. They ask whether a response will solve the problem or only release temporary emotion. Silence can be useful in these moments. But silence itself is not the lesson. Silence without clarity may simply be avoidance. A person can refuse to communicate because they are afraid, resentful, or emotionally immature. True strength is not disappearing whenever a conversation becomes difficult. True strength is knowing when to speak, what to say, and when further words no longer serve any purpose. Clarity may require a difficult explanation once. It may require an apology. It may require you to say, "I was wrong." Mentally strong people are not afraid of these words because their identity does not depend on always appearing correct. They can separate a mistake from their entire worth. Weak pride explains endlessly to avoid responsibility. Strength accepts responsibility without turning one failure into a permanent identity. After responsibility has been taken, however, the strong person does not accept endless punishment. He does not allow someone to use a past mistake as permanent control. He makes amends where possible, changes his behavior, and continues living. An apology is not a contract requiring lifelong submission. Accountability aims at repair. Manipulation aims at ownership. The same principle applies to criticism. Examinit. Keep what is useful. Release what is not. You do not need to accept an entire judgment simply because one part contains truth. Someone may communicate a valid concern in a disrespectful way. You can learn from the concern without accepting the disrespect. Another person may misunderstand most of the situation, but notice one weakness you need to address. Mental strength allows nuance. You do not need to declare the critic entirely right or entirely wrong. Humility makes this possible. Humility does not mean thinking poorly of yourself. It means seeing yourself accurately. You can recognize your strengths without arrogance and your weaknesses without shame. The more honestly you know yourself, the less desperately you need strangers to define you. You know where you have failed. You know what you are repairing. You know what progress you have made. This direct knowledge becomes more stable than temporary opinion. There will still be nights when you replay conversations. You will imagine better answers and stronger defenses. The mind does this because it wants control over what has already happened. It believes that by rehearsing the past, it can prevent future pain. But the conversation no longer exists anywhere except inside your memory. The other person may have moved on while you continue arguing with their shadow. When this happens, return to the present. Ask yourself, what action belongs to me now? Perhaps you need to send one clear message. Perhaps you need to apologize. Perhaps you need to establish a boundary. Or perhaps nothing remains to be done. In that case, the work is acceptance. Not every emotional problem has an external solution. Sometimes, peace begins when you stop searching for one more conversation. Your attention is one of the most valuable resources you possess. Every endless argument consumes a portion of it. Every attempt to control another person's perception takes energy from your health, work, relationships, and future. Mentally strong people protect their attention because they understand that a meaningful life requires focus. They refuse to spend their best hours defending themselves to people who have no meaningful role in the life they are building. Instead, they invest that energy in what compounds. They read, they train, they improve a skill. They care for the people who have earned their presence. They rest without guilt. They build something that will exist after the argument is forgotten. While others remain trapped in imaginary debates, they continue becoming stronger. Over time, an unexpected thing happens. The respect they once chased begins to arrive naturally. People trust them because their actions are consistent. Their words carry weight because they do not speak merely to fill space. When they explain something, others listen because they know it has been considered. They do not need to declare themselves confident. Their stability communicates confidence before they say anything. This is one of life's great paradoxes. The more desperately you chase approval, the less secure you become. The more you demand that others respect you, the less respect your behavior creates. But when you focus on becoming someone worthy of your own respect, external recognition often appears as a consequence. And when it does not appear, your peace remains intact because applause was never the foundation. The people who truly matter will rarely demand that you remain permanently on trial. They will ask before assuming. They will listen before judging. They will allow clarification without forcing endless defense. They may disagree with you, but they will not require you to abandon yourself in order to preserve the relationship. Healthy love does not demand total agreement. It makes room for two people to remain individuals. When someone repeatedly forces you to prove your character, ask whether the real issue is your explanation or the absence of trust. Trust cannot be rebuilt through longer speeches alone. It requires consistent action, time, and mutual willingness. If one person has decided that every action is suspicious, no amount of language will create security. At some point, both people must decide whether they are willing to build trust or continue living inside accusation. Mentally strong people do not fear this decision. They know that some relationships can be repaired and others must be released. They do not leave at the first sign of difficulty, but neither do they remain forever in a place where clarity is punished. They understand that peace is not found by avoiding every painful choice. Sometimes, peace is waiting on the other side of a decision you have postponed because you wanted everyone to approve. The moment you stop seeking universal permission, your life begins to expand. You apply for the opportunity before anyone believes you are ready. You begin the project without announcing it. You leave the environment that has been weakening you. You say no without writing an essay. You make choices based on values rather than fear. This freedom may feel lonely at first because you are no longer surrounded by constant reassurance. But eventually, solitude becomes the place where your own voice grows stronger. In quiet moments, ask yourself what kind of person you would become if nobody could see your progress for the next 5 years. Would you still study? Would you still train? Would you still choose honesty when dishonesty would be easier? Would you still improve if no one applauded? Your answer reveals whether you are building character or performing identity. Performance requires an audience. Character continues in private. This is the foundation of mental strength. It is not a perfect argument. It is not the ability to silence every critic. It is not a dramatic refusal to care. It is a quiet agreement with yourself. You will listen carefully. You will speak honestly. You will admit When you are wrong, you will explain what responsibility requires. But you will not beg people to grant you permission to trust your own considered judgment. So, the next time you feel the urge to defend every choice, pause before writing the long message. Ask yourself what you are truly trying to achieve. Is there a genuine misunderstanding that clear communication can solve? Is someone directly affected and entitled to an honest conversation? Have you made a mistake that requires accountability? If so, speak. Speak calmly, directly, and without hiding. But if you have already explained yourself, and the other person continues twisting your words, recognize the limit. If you are adding details only because you cannot tolerate their disappointment, recognize the fear. If you are chasing someone who has chosen not to understand, stop. Your dignity does not depend on winning that pursuit. You do not need to follow your name into every room. You do not need to correct every version of yourself that exists inside another person's mind. You do not need to manage every rumor, answer every accusation, or prove every intention. That work has no ending. Even if you convince one person today, another will question you tomorrow. A life devoted to controlling perception leaves no time for building character. Let people misunderstand what they are unwilling to examine. Let them hold opinions created from fragments. Let them disagree. Their judgment may affect your reputation, but it does not have to enter your identity. Your task is smaller and more demanding. Act with integrity. Correct what needs correction. Learn from what is true. Release what is not yours. At the end of your life, you will not be measured by how many arguments you won or how many critics finally admitted they were wrong. You will be measured by quieter questions. Did you remain honest when dishonesty was convenient? Did you remain kind without surrendering your boundaries? Did you accept responsibility without becoming a prisoner of shame? Did you build a life that reflected your values? Even when nobody applauded, words fade. Arguments are forgotten. Opinions change. But character leaves evidence everywhere it goes. Your habits remain. Your integrity remains. Your discipline remains. Your treatment of others remains. A well-lived life becomes an explanation no speech can equal. Mentally strong people do not stop explaining themselves because they have nothing to say. They stop because they know exactly what needs to be said, and they refuse to add what fear demands. They understand that clarity is complete, even when agreement does not follow. They communicate, but they do not beg. They listen, but they do not surrender their judgment. They care, but they do not abandon themselves. When you understand this, something inside you becomes quiet, not the silence of avoidance, but the calm of certainty. You no longer need every person to understand your direction before you take the next step. You no longer need permission to protect your peace. You no longer require applause to continue the work. You simply move forward, guided by values that do not change with the room, strengthened by choices that nobody else can make for you, and free from the endless need to prove who you are. Because in the end, real power was never found in saying nothing. Real power was found in knowing yourself so clearly that nothing unnecessary needed to be said.